I'm filled up. I'm filled to the brim in an eternal way that's not going to come collapsing down around me. It's not a house built out of straw. It's not a house built on the sand. It's not going to slip away into nothingness. It is the good.
Welcome to the Reach College Podcast with your speaker, Pastor Taylor Gabbert.
Who knows the classic Three Little Pigs fairy tale, right? Like everyone, I'm assuming, right? So the first little pig, he makes a house out of straw. The second little pig, it's like, someone's been sleeping in my bed, I think. Then the third little pig's like, Grandma, what big ears you have, right? So we all know that story. What is that story? What is the actual story of the Three Little Pigs about? It's about what the house is built out of, right? And not only that, but it's about the laziness of the different pigs, right? So some of the pigs, one of the pigs puts a lot of effort into building his house out of something that's solid, that will stand up to pressure, right? And then the other two little pigs, they just want to play. They don't want to take as much time, so they build their house out of weak materials, right? So what does the Bible say our house should be built on? There's a story in the Bible that should be pretty common to most of you. It talks about a man building his house on the sand, right? And it says when the tide comes in, the sand doesn't hold it up, right? Well, we're told that we're supposed to build our lives, build our house on the rock of ages, right? We're supposed to build it on the Lord. And so the question I want to ask you today is about, we're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 11, and we're going to look at what the world wants us to build our house on, what the world wants us to have our legacy in or care about. You know, what does the world say is the only thing that lasts after you die, right? The world in general. It says it's your legacy, right? It's your name. Your name is what will carry on, and you have to build your name into something that's going to last. You know, we see this happen all the time. I've referenced this before, like people who give a lot of money to charity so they can get their name on a library or a school or a gymnasium named after them, right? And I talked about kind of how silly that is because, you know, you go into those buildings all the time, and it's like you don't care who that building is named after, like 99% of the time, right? So it's not really like that important or lasting of a legacy, right? Even, you know, we talked last week about your own great-grandchildren will barely be able to remember you. And so the question is, what really does last after you die? The world, it says you can build a legacy on wealth. You've heard the name Rockefellers, right? Like, that's a family name that's built on a legacy of wealth. You've probably heard of the Kennedys. That's a family name built on a legacy of power. Michael Jordan built a legacy on fame, right? I think you could make the argument that you can build a legacy on sex. I think Hugh Hefner did that. You can argue whether that went well for him or not, but that's what he did, right? He built his legacy around sex. So all humans are trying to build their own kingdom, their own legacy. And I want you to see right through it. We're going to cut right to the chase on what that is. All forms of building your own legacy or your own name are just a form of being your own God. That's all there is to it. It is you exalting yourself, putting yourself on the altar to be worshipped, right? Jesus says it's not the gift on the altar, it's the altar that makes the gift sacred, right? We are the gift to God, ourselves, but only if we're on the altar that is Jesus Christ. Only if we're offered up in the same way that He was offered up. So, I tried to build my own kingdom in my own life. I had a career. I just want to put this in perspective for you guys. I spent 8 years working towards my dream job. I was in the position that was my favorite job for 15 months. 8 years, 15 months. After it was over, it was like, really? That's what I spent all that time trying to get to, right? That was going to be my legacy, the thing that mattered in my life. 15 months. I tried to build a legacy with money. I got a lot of money, and then I lost a lot of money. And I figured out that money is really hard to hold on to. I tried to have a family. I built a legacy around a girl, not Abigail, that left. And I lost my position, my money, and my family all within a year time span. It all just came collapsing down around me. It was a house made out of straw. It was a house built on sand, right? It didn't last because I built it on a weak foundation out of weak materials. And it just dissipated the first time a strong wind came through. So let's look at what a kingdom created looks like. What does it look like when we build our own kingdom? Look at Genesis chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Now all the earth used the same language and the same words, and it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is it says they were using the same language and the same words. But if you back up to literally chapter 10, verse 31 and 32, it says, these are the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages. Okay, so it's already confusing, right? It's like, wait, did they not have multiple languages or did they have multiple languages? So I just want to put this story in the chronology of where we are in the world at this point, right? Because it's important for us to understand the way ancient Near Eastern writing happened and why the things that non-believers are going to very quickly point to and be like, look, see, that doesn't even make sense. That's a contradiction. It's important for you to understand why it's not as simple as what was written first or second in order, okay? Because they didn't tell stories like that in a linear way. So if you look at chapter 10, starting in verse 8, it says, now Cush fathered Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Right? So that is where this is in the chronology, right? What's happening in chapter 10, they call it the Table of Nations. It's about the spreading out of humanity, the dispersing of humanity. But this story that we're about to get to in chapter 11 is happening somewhere in the middle of chapter 10. Right? It's not that chapter 10 happens, you get all these different nations and languages, and then you get to chapter 11. Chapter 11 is somewhere in the middle of that. And this is very common for the writing style. They talk about, anytime you're reading the Old Testament, you need to think, they're talking about a subject, and when they're done talking about that subject, then they might go back and talk about different aspects of that subject. They don't tell stories like we do where they have to get in every detail of every different thing along a linear path. Okay? So that's where we are in the chronology. In verse 2, it says that they traveled east. Now, if you have a CSB, it probably says they came from the east. That is a bad translation of that verse. Traveling to the east, starting with everything from the fall to this point, is always an indicator that they are moving away from God's will. Traveling to the east is our first indicator that whatever's happening in this story, it's negative. Immediately it's negative, and we know because they're traveling to the east away from God's will. So they're traveling to the east, they find a plain, and they settle there. Now, the first indicator was that they're traveling east. The second indicator is that they are now in a direct contradiction to something we've seen twice in God's command. In chapter 9, verse 1, it says, Then God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The first time we see that command is in chapter 1, verse 28. And what we're seeing here is that God's plan for humanity was to be fruitful, spread out through the earth, and fill it, right? To steward his creation. And this, what's happening right now is immediately we're given language that is the opposite of that. Because they are actively trying to not do what God has told them to do. And this is going to become more clear because the way that the Bible shows us whether an action, the way the Old Testament shows us whether an action is good or bad is a lot of time in the consequences of that action, how it unfolds, right? So they've settled down, and everything that we see from here on out is going to follow this context, right? Between the two indicators you see in verse 1 and 2, this is not a good story. So if we understand that, then everything that happens after this is going to make more sense, right? So look at verse 3. Then they said to one another, "Come, let's make bricks and fire them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let's make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered abroad over the face of all the earth." Okay, so they said to one another, and I want you to notice what they're not doing. They are not seeking God's counsel. They are not looking to ask God what He wants of them. They are just talking amongst themselves. In James 4:13 it says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow, for you are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." All right, so the bottom line here is that we're told by the Bible to seek the counsel of God, to walk with Him. We just got done last week talking about Enoch. Enoch, between 4, 5, and 6, there's this pinnacle moment where the Bible hones in on Enoch to say, he got it. Everyone else who is walking for their own name or walking for their own benefit is basically just dying, or they're being known for something that's temporary. But Enoch walked with God. And the Bible wants you to see that walking with God is the point. So basically, what we're seeing in the Tower of Babel is that they are arrogantly making their own plans in defiance to God. They've decided we're going to do whatever we want to do, and we don't want to do the thing that God has actually commanded us to do. How can you hope to make plans without talking to God about them? Like, you have no idea what's going to happen next to you. The statement, your life is a vapor. How does that make sense? You look at somebody who lives into their 80s and 90s and you think, wow, that's old. Until you look at it in terms of eternity, and all of a sudden, 80, 90 years is a blip. It's a mist. Here 1 second and gone the next. You have to include God in your plans. So I want you to notice a theme here. In chapter 3, Eve wants to make a name for herself. Essentially, she wants to be her own God. She wants to go outside of God's will. She wants to establish her own way of living, right? That starts there. Then you get Lamech's children in chapter 4. Jabal, he is known for being the father of the nomadic herdsmen. You get Jubal, who is the father of musicians, and you get Tubal-Cain, who is the father of weapons, right? So we're seeing this progression of humanity that is about building a name for itself, being known for something, accomplishing something, like getting your college degree, or having a family, or a super successful career, right? They are all worried about making a name for themselves. And at the moment that we see Lamech's kids in chapter 4, we're also shown Enos, and what is he known for? Worshiping the Lord. And we're given a comparison of somebody who's known because of something eternal, something that will last, something that matters, the worship of God. Then we get to chapter 5 where we have this climax moment with Enoch, who is walking with God. That's what he is known for. We immediately go into chapter 6 where we're told there were great men of renown, powerful men, the men that everybody knew about, but only Noah was righteous in his generation. See, every step of the way so far, we've seen the natural inclination of humanity to make a name for itself, to go away from God's will and do what it thinks will be good. And yet, all along the way, we're shown what good is. We're shown that good is walking with the Lord, being in the Lord's presence. Right? Nimrod is mentioned as somebody who was a great hunter before the Lord. Right? Something about his life was worth mentioning because whatever he was doing for the Lord. He was in worship for the Lord. So, the reality is, the Bible tells us that there is a name above all names. So anytime that you are trying to build up your own name and exalt your own name, you are inherently trying to put your name above the name. You are missing the point. All those who worshiped God, walked with God, they benefit after death, but the others accomplished something they couldn't take with them. Everyone else up to this point, whatever they've accomplished, they've died and left it behind. It didn't matter. So, how are they going to make this name for themselves? They decide to build a big city with an amazing tower, right? So they're going to basically build a monument to themselves, right? They're going to build this wonder of the world, if you will. Now, the phrasing of even this sentence, in your Bibles, it will say, let's make bricks and bake them or burn them. The actual phrasing is let's brick bricks and burn burning. That's the Hebrew literal phrasing, right? Now, a lot of you are already like, why? But here's the thing. There's a comparison going on here. That phrasing is meant to recall God saying to the earth, let the earth bring forth vegetation, because the literal phrasing there is, let the earth grass. Right? So the Hebrew phrasing is a parallel. And the reason that that's important is because God brought forth life, and the best humans can do is bring forth inanimate dead bricks. That's the best thing they can come up with. So they're going to make a name for themselves. They're trying to create the way that God created, but God created life, and they're going to create a tower. They're going to create bricks. That's the best they've got. And you got to think of the audience. Think about who Israel is at this point. Israel is probably somewhere in Numbers, right? They are wandering around in the wilderness. They've just come out of Egypt as slaves. Think about this. What were they doing in Egypt? They were making bricks. So you know what they just heard in this story? These people are proud of doing a slave job. The people who are building Babel are going to make a great name for themselves doing the work of slaves. That's the best they've got. This would have been preposterous to the ancient Israelite audience hearing this story. They'd have been like, that's absurd. Why would you be proud of making bricks? We were forced to make bricks for a long time. All right, so that immediately gives us some context to what we're looking at in this story. So they are building essentially an idol or a temple to themselves. The language is designed to defy God's explicit command, right? They are using the language that God, of what God's command is to say we don't want to do that thing. This is about autonomy. What is all sin? It's about ruling ourselves. But what do we know about sin? Sin just enslaves you to it. You go from being under God to being under sin. So these people are saying, we want to be free of God's command. We want to be autonomous. So to do that, we're going to do the work of slaves. Right? So every time that we try to build a name for ourselves outside of the will of God, free ourselves and be autonomous from what God has in our lives, we find ourselves enslaved to the things of our own making, to our own creations, our own idols, our own sin. They say they want the top to reach to heaven. Now, there's a couple different ways that this can be interpreted. I really do not think that they thought they were going to build a tower so tall that they opened up the door on the top floor and heaven was there. I don't think that's what is being said here. Now, what I do think is one of the maybe probable lesser parts is that they were saying, let's build a tower that's so amazing that to look at it, it causes your gaze to be to the heavens, right? So they were essentially saying, we'll lift people's eyes to the heavens. That's one option that can be part of it. I think even more likely is that they were talking about bringing heaven to earth. They were essentially saying, let's build a tower so amazing, so perfect, so great for us that being in it, being on the top floor of it is like sitting on the throne of heaven. It's like being in heaven. It's like being gods to ourselves, right? So they are essentially saying, we're going to replicate heaven on earth. Now, we see this, that if you look up the Tower of Babel, what you're going to find is Sumerian ziggurats, or I don't know how to say it, but essentially it was these giant skyscraper-like stone buildings they built, and they thought that the gods resided on the top floor which was essentially a temple floor. Now, this probably predates that exact model or that exact purpose, but what did they think? They thought heaven existed on the top floor of their tower. That's what they thought. So that's the language that's being used here, is that they are going to essentially create a heavenly space where they are the gods. This is what brings us to our second theme, and I've kind of been alluding to this along the way. Why did Eve take the fruit? She didn't believe that what God had for her was good. She thought that she was going to take the good apart from God. And all throughout the Bible up to this point, we're 11 chapters in, everyone who has walked away from God has been attempting to find the good and missing it entirely. And the people who have walked with God have figured out walking with God is the good. That's why Cain wanders away from God. That's why Lamech marries 2 wives and is a murderer. That's why the flood happens at all. It's because humans keep trying to take the good by themselves, devoid of God. That sound like our culture at all? People are constantly trying to create their own reality and establish what's good in their lives apart from God. And it doesn't work like that. The only thing that brings you true joy, true fulfillment, is walking with God. The key concept of looking for the good devoid of God, is not understanding that God has what's best for us in mind. He loves us so much, He wants for us to have the good. But that good is being with Him. We create kingdoms because we don't trust God, and God crushes those kingdoms because they keep us from Him. They keep us from being in love with Him. They keep us from the good. I always thought life was going to be really easy. Like the majority of my 20s, I thought, well, I don't understand the problem. I went to my college classes. I graduated college. I got a job. I make money. Why is this difficult? Why do people have a hard time with this? What I realized is all of that was a blessing from the Lord. And when my head got too big finally, He opposed me in that. He crushed that kingdom. And all of that ease of life, it disappeared really rapidly. It fell apart around me. Look at verse 5. Now the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they have started to do. And now nothing which they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. Okay. So the first thing I want you to see here is in a lot of Old Testament literature, there's what we call chiasms. So a chiasm is a literary tool where the story mirror images itself, right? So like the first verse of the story and the last verse of the story will be a mirror image. The second verse and the second to last verse will be a mirror image, and so on and so forth. And what it's designed to do is bring you to the pinnacle point. The center, the only part of the story that doesn't have a matching mirror image, is the point that it wants you to focus on. So verse 5 is the center of the chiasm. It is the part of the story where the story gets completely inverted, right? What's happening in verses 1 through 4 is that humanity is going one way. They are making a decision to rebel against God. And in verse 5, God joins into the story. He comes down to see what's going on. And as soon as God gets involved, the entire story is going to reverse itself. And we're going to go the opposite direction. Because God's will overpowers our will. The irony that happens right here in the story is that in verse 4, they're saying, we're going to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. And in verse 5, God has to come down to see it. He has to descend just to get to their puny effort to make something heavenly. Listen, I don't care what kind of empire you build for yourself. I don't care if you rival Elon Musk and Bill Gates. Your efforts are still puny compared to the God of all the universe. He still has to come down to earth to just see what you think heaven looks like. And that's not how we get to heaven. We have to be lifted up to heaven by God. God says that they're unified. They're defiant of Him. And then He says anything they try will be possible for them. And this comment, it's a weird comment. It's like anything they do is going to be successful, and they're unified. It seems like almost like a weird thing. Non-Christians will point to this part in the Bible and they'll be, see, God doesn't want us to be successful or happy. He doesn't want us to be unified. He wants us to be at each other's throats. Okay, remember the context of the story. This is why this is important. Everything that we're doing here is people rebelling against God, going away from God's will, traveling east. This is a defiant story. The statement is not devoid of the context. You can read it like this. Any evil they do, they will be successful at. Any defiance that they try, they will accomplish. That's what humanity's been doing all of its existence. It's been succeeding at rebelling, and the only reason that we don't get further in our rebellion is because God opposes us, and He opposes us for our own good. Because when God opposes our evil, evil tries to kill us. It tries to consume us. And God says, I don't want you to be successful at destroying yourself, so I'm going to oppose you. Because anything you do in your evil heart would be successful if God did not oppose it. So God, He begins to move backwards in this story. The let us come down. This is really cool. This is why it was also important for you to understand the let's brick bricks portion, because the let us brick bricks backwards is the same letter structure that basically is the verb that God is using to say let us go down. It's a complete reversal. So what they were building up, God now tears down. That's what's happening. It's a complete reversal. It's designed to point you to the fact that God is undoing brick by brick what they have built up, brick by brick. So God, He tears down this idol, He resists the proud, and He foils their plan. He changes the ability of their plan. And how does He do that? He does that by stirring up their languages. Now here's the thing. I want you to see how all-powerful God is. God confuses humanity's language, and the exact problem that all of humanity's had since then of not being able to communicate. I mean, forget language differences. We miscommunicate with each other and we're speaking the same language, right? So the communication problem that exists in humanity, God proves His power to overcome on the day of Pentecost, when exactly what they say in any language is understood by all the hearers. Why? Because the message of the gospel was unstoppable. It overwhelmed the curse that happens at Babel of this communication error is rectified on the day of Pentecost when God says nothing is going to stop the gospel from spreading. It cannot be prevented even by the wickedness of humanity. Some of you in this room are not going to follow God truly and wholeheartedly until He breaks you. Some of you are going to have to hit a wall. I pray that that's the softest wall it can be, because mine was not. And honestly, comparatively, mine it was pretty soft. I don't have permanent consequences for what I did. I mean, I have the shame of my sin, right? But I don't have, and even that, right? It's not permanent. But God allowed me to escape the consequences of my life and follow Him. That's what I consider a soft wall. Some of you might face permanent consequences for some of the things you do. Not permanent in eternity, but permanent now, because it's the only way that God can get you to turn from building your own kingdom. You know, the Bible talks about taking an eye out if it's causing you to sin. It says it's better to enter into eternity with one less eye than to be cast into the fire, right? Why is that? Because God understands that it doesn't matter what it takes in this vapor of life to follow Him. It's worth it to be with him for all of eternity. I don't care what I have to give up. I don't care what hits I have to take. I hope that God unbricks my entire kingdom so that I can walk with him every day for the rest of eternity. That is what matters. So God's, this portion of the story at Babel, this is the fulfillment of the prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Right? God comes to earth, he brings his will with him, and it occurs. I have this phrase I tell you guys about, you're playing in a mud puddle and God wants to take you to the beach. See, the reality is all of humanity, in their effort to find the good, to have it, to take it for themselves, is essentially trying to build sandcastles in mud puddles. And you're just hyper-focused. And meanwhile, God is going, beach, right here, whole place, way more fun. We can do so many great things. And we're just so stuck in our little world, looking at our little puddle, trying to have our fun, our good. We're missing the much bigger, grander scheme that God has to fulfill us and build us up. Look at verse 8. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore it was named Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Think of the current audience. Again, the Israelites are moving through the wilderness. They're headed towards the promised land. They've been told God's going to take you to this special place he's prepared for you. We've been told that, by the way. God's going to take us to this special place that he's prepared for us. Right? And so they're on their way there. And God says, but if you disobey, you're going to be scattered. Right? He points to the story of Babel and he says, if you try to build your own kingdom, I will scatter you. Right? We know this happens. We know the exile occurs. The reality is God won't let us persist in our sin. And the city gets named Babel. What was their goal? To make a name for themselves. Mission accomplished. It gets named after their humiliation. It gets named after their failure, after what God does in that place. It's an embarrassing term, and it ends up being the city of Babylon, which is a synonym, the whole Bible, for the place that defies God and is evil, the place where evil lives and dwells. Babylon's like the capital of hell, essentially. And that is what this term comes to represent, starting just in chapter 11, going through the entire Bible, is the place where humans take pride in their defiance of God. Their attempt was to defy God's will, but they actually caused God's will. Right? They didn't want to spread out. They didn't want to disperse. And because of their defiance, God came down and dispersed them. He made his will so, even while they were trying to oppose him. Here's the thing. You can participate in God's will for your life. You can. And if you do, there's joy in it. You actually get to reap the benefits of what God is doing when you participate in it, when you're a part of it, when you're on his team. Or you can fight it. God's will's still going to happen. It's still going to happen, but you're going to be miserable because you're going to be on the opposing side. And God's will is going to occur in spite of you, and you're not going to reap the benefits of it. You're going to miss out on it. We've seen stories like Barak, who is in Judges, who will not get on board with what the Lord is doing the entire time. And as the story unfolds, God goes, okay, I'm still going to accomplish this. I'm even going to use you to accomplish this, but you're going to get none of the credit. He misses out because he's opposing God's will. He's never on board with what God is doing. God's discipline is a blessing. You understand that God's discipline is what allows us to continue to be close to him? Right? I always tell you guys, one of my all-time favorite things in the Bible is the name Jehovah Jireh. Jehovah Jireh means the Lord who provides. And it's the only name of God. See, names of God, they exist in perfection. If God gives himself a name, if he says, this is my name, that name of him cannot ever cease to be his nature, cease to be who he is. He has to live that out perfectly at all times. So Jehovah Jireh means the Lord who provides, which means God is always providing. Well, it's the only name of God that has a condition around it. It says the Lord who provides on his mountain. Okay, so where do you have to be to get the Lord's provision? On his mountain. Okay, but how can there be a condition on the perfect, infinite nature of God? This is the best part. The Lord who provides on his mountain also provides off of his mountain. He just provides something different. He provides discipline. Because when you stray from the Lord's mountain, he disciplines you to turn you back to the only place where provision feels like provision. See, when you're being provided with discipline, it's painful. But that's designed to keep you from running off the nearest cliff so that you will go back to be in the presence of the Lord on his mountain in worship of him, where he can provide for you in a way that's joyful and fulfilling. This is why Christians are taught to thank God for discipline. Because when I wander away from God and he smacks me and it hurts, it makes me go, that's right, this is the wrong direction. I don't want to do this. Thank you, Lord, for pointing me back towards your mountain. And every time I'm on the mountain and I'm in the presence of the Lord and he provides for me what? His presence, I'm filled up. I'm filled to the brim in an eternal way that's not going to come collapsing down around me. It's not a house built out of straw. It's not a house built on the sand. It's not going to slip away into nothingness. It is the good. And it's only given to us by a good God. What is good for you? Are you conforming to what God says is good? Or is your good still your own sin and your own pride? God's good is that he is saving you. He's redeeming you. He's drawing you close to himself. He's putting you in a position where you will be filled up. If your good is anything other than that, you're drinking poison. You're trying to run off the nearest cliff. You're killing yourself. The thing is, like God, this is not a list of rules that God just kind of dropped on the table one day and was like, this is a way to have a relationship with him, to get to know him, to be in his presence, to grow with him. That's why I read the Bible. I don't study this thing week in and week out like, okay, what rules am I not following? Like, that's not the point of it. God wants a relationship with you, and he will resist anything that takes you from him. I heard a pastor one time say that in a relationship, when you get jealous of your partner basically spending too much time with someone else, it's a natural inclination that says it's not good for them to stray from our relationship to be with someone else, right? This is particularly true in marriage. In marriage, it's bad for your spouse to stray and go participate in another relationship outside of the covenant, right? That's a bad thing. We know that's bad for them. So it is a righteous jealousy that then says, no, come back to me. Be here. Now, humans, we display jealousy in petty ways, right? We kind of lash out. God's not petty about it. But God has a covenant relationship with us. And when we are being unfaithful to him, when we are straying from that covenant, he knows that's not good for us. And his righteous jealousy is designed to bring us back to him so we can have the good. I want you to ask yourself this week what your kingdom is. Are you building a tower brick by brick? Or are you spending time in the presence of the Lord? Are you walking with the living God? And if God shows you that you're building a tower for yourself, you should ask him to unbrick it. you should ask Him to reverse the process, to save you from trying to build your own heaven that won't even come close to mimicking being with the Lord.
Hey guys, this is Philip Jackson, pastor to young adults at Evergreen Baptist Church. I want to invite you to come to Reach. We meet every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at Evergreen Church in South Tulsa, just east of Mingo on 111th Street. The mission of Reach Tulsa is to cultivate a young adult community that's defined by real transformation and the sincere pursuit of a godly life through training in biblical disciplines, personal development, and intentionally transitioning into independence as mature members of the body of Christ. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe to our content. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Reach Young Adult Ministry is a part of Evergreen Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information and additional lessons, please visit our website, evergreenbc.org.